The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
President Obama will be proposing new taxes on the wealthiest Americans at his upcoming State of the Union address. This will tax profits on investments for the wealthiest Americans and also make it a little more difficult to pass assets tax-free to their heirs. And in exchange, President Obama will be enacting a new series of tax cuts for the middle class. President Obama on January 20th, tomorrow, will be talking about this new plan, which will take a lot of those proceeds from the new taxes, $320 billion over 10 years, and expand tax credits for higher education, expand child care, create a new tax break for two-earner couples, etc. So under the plan, the capital gains tax for couples with incomes over $500,000 per year would be raised from its current level of 23.8% to 28%. The plan would also eliminate a tax break known as a step-up, which allows heirs to avoid capital gains taxes on large inheritances. And the plan would also put a new tax on the biggest financial institutions, basing the fee on liabilities in order to discourage the risky types of borrowing that we saw at least partially to blame for the financial crash of the George W. Bush presidency. And there also would be an extension of the earned income tax credit to families without children, which would benefit about 13 million low-income workers. According to officials, these new taxes would almost exclusively impact the top 1% of income earners. Note that the taxes for middle-class Americans have actually decreased under President Obama. He has lowered taxes for most people. When he took office in 2007, the middle 20% of households had an effective tax rate of 14.4%, and the top 1% paid 27.4%. By 2014, that middle group has seen their tax rate decline to 13.7%, while the wealthiest have seen a bump to 33.4%. Lewis, I can say all day, I can spend the whole hour talking about how this will mostly impact the 1%, and this is a tax cut, a further tax cut for those with middle and lower incomes, but still you will see those earning lower and middle incomes support the policies of the Republican Party, which benefit the 1%, a group which most of these individuals will never belong to.
Right. There's still a lot of misinformation out there, and voters are falling for it. This is a good thing, but I'm still not hearing enough talk about all the big tax loopholes for big companies and how companies that are making billions of dollars in profit are paying nothing in taxes.
But Lewis, they're job creators.
Maybe. They're certainly creating plenty of jobs in other countries. We can say that with certitude.
Yeah, there's no question about that. So we will see exactly how President Obama outlines this tomorrow evening at the State of the Union address. Very exciting news, by the way, surrounding tomorrow's State of the Union address, because we know who will be giving the presidential State of the Union address. It is the president. I know not everybody admits he's a legitimate president, but it is the president, Barack Obama. What was not certain was who would be giving the Republican response to President Obama's State of the Union address. And Lewis, I have to tell you, I am so excited that hog-castrator, new Republican senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst, will be giving the Republican response to the State of the Union address. We've been excitedly looking forward to the Republican primary debates for the 2016 election, Lewis, for entertainment. We're going to get a little bit of a preview. We're not going to have to wait until next year because hog-castrator Joni Ernst will be speaking tomorrow, responding to the president. I love it.
I am somewhat excited about this. I'm hoping that that it'll be amusing, that there will be something there. You know, it could be completely vanilla. It could be just all well-written and perfectly scripted and delivered in a normal way. And it may not be as exciting as we think, but I'm hoping that this is what we hope it will be.
And I really, really hope that this is a gaffe-worthy response. Remember, of course, Marco Rubio awkwardly drinking the water, Bobby Jindal walking out like he was on meth, seemingly. I mean, he just seemed completely hopped up and staring into the camera in this just bizarre way. I just am really excited about this. And the funniest element of this is that speaking to reporters at a Republican retreat, Mitch McConnell, the Republican majority leader, and House Speaker John Boehner said that the reason Joni Ernst is going to be speaking is because her life story is very compelling, the life story of growing up castrating hogs, that is, and that she is, quote, the perfect messenger for the Republican Party. If Joni Ernst is the perfect messenger for the Republican Party, then that is a party whose platform is in dire need of a revision. There's nothing scarier I can imagine, Lewis, than saying, this is the person who perfectly embodies the platform of the Republican Party, Joni Ernst.
Well, you know what? It's partially true, because this is someone who they use and they put on a pedestal to fool all the voters into voting Republican and voting for people who are not going to help them, not going to represent them. And Joni Ernst is one of those people.
But don't
She's just
you
like
think,
an American
Lewis,
hero.
Do you really think so? I think there are many more reasonable Republicans who see Joni Ernst and say, this is ridiculous. What has this party become?
Maybe, but they probably also realize that she is like the woman next door. She's an average American. She's an American hero. She rose from humble beginnings and became a leader. And so they put her up there because they know that their constituents will eat it up.
Yeah,
that's it.
Ignore her anti-science beliefs, ignore her incredible, destructive so-called small government beliefs, ignore her policies on foreign policy, ignore it all because she will seemingly throw red meat out there to some Republican voters. I'm looking forward to it. That's tomorrow night, and of course we will be talking about it. Huge news from the Supreme Court, which has agreed to consider same-sex marriage nationally and whether the Constitution trumps the decisions that individual states might make and that some states have made about same-sex marriage. This is a great thing, Lewis. I am weekly almost stunned at how quickly we are progressing when it comes to same-sex marriage. The bigots are going to lose. They're going to be looked back at the same way those who opposed racial integration in the military and interracial marriage are looked back at today. And we will see what the Supreme Court ultimately says. This is going to be a process over several months. There will be arguments from either side, and eventually, maybe in June, the Supreme Court will issue some kind of decision here. And we will see to what extent they issue a significant decision, in the sense that they could choose to issue an opinion that may leave it up to the states. So you could have an opinion that does not drastically change the circumstances, the status quo, but we could see a ruling, a decision from the Supreme Court that says, no, states cannot just say that same-sex marriage is against the law any longer. And remember that over 35 states already have same-sex marriage or civil unions in some way, shape, or form, that 70% of the population of this country lives in a state that has same-sex marriage. This is happening quickly, Lewis, and to be perfectly honest, we couldn't get this over with too soon because there are bigger issues to move on and focus on.
There are plenty of states that are hoping that the Supreme Court will leave it to the states to decide. Ultimately, you're going to see the majority of states having legal gay marriage anyway. So I don't see how this is going to be an important decision.
Well, I think that the way in which this would be huge is if the Supreme Court says, look at what has happened in the states that have enacted legal same-sex marriage. Nothing negative has happened. Look at the strong case that has been made that same-sex couples are not equally protected by states being able to keep gay marriage illegal. We are saying gay marriage must be legal nationwide, and that would be a huge decision. And you know that all of the groups, the AFA, the FRC, all of these groups will go absolutely berserk about tyrannical government and the activist judges. And we won't care, Lewis, because it might actually let us move on and focus on issues that really matter, because two dudes getting married is not an issue that any of us should be worried about. If they love each other, they should be able to get married.
And I think regardless of what happens here, we're going to have equality across the board at some point in the not too distant future, no matter what. But of course, this would be interesting to see.
And by the way, even if they don't love each other, they should still be able to get married, because opposite sex couples that don't love each other are still able to get married. So why should it be any different? The Republican Party, in the first week since taking control of both houses of Congress, the House and Senate, have introduced 6 anti-abortion bills. What a great use of time, shifting apparently from dozens of repeal attempts for the Affordable Care Act to multiple attempts to limit abortion rights. Here are the 6 bills. We have the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. We talked about that one. That would implement a nationwide 20-week abortion ban. We have the Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act, also known as PRENDA. This would prohibit discrimination against the unborn child on the basis of sex, gender, or other purposes. We had the right of refusal within the Public Health Service Act. Refusal bills allow healthcare professionals to simply refuse to provide abortions based on their religious beliefs. We had the H.R. 217 Title 10 Amendment, which would prevent any funds for women's health care from going to organizations that also provide abortions, which is unnecessary since there is already a law that prevents federal funding from going specifically to abortion services. And we have the Federal Pregnant Women Health and Safety Act, which, as we have told you before, would require doctors who perform abortions to have admitting privileges at a hospital within what are oftentimes restrictive geographical boundaries. It is a way to make abortions way more expensive for doctors and way more complicated. What a great use of time, right, Lewis? Is this how they're building jobs or something?
Off to a great start. Wouldn't this actually do the opposite? Wouldn't this reduce the number of jobs in state?
You would think it would if you're thinking clearly. And what's amazing is that this is so extreme. The Republican Party's position on abortion has gotten so extreme that some female Republicans are now actually pushing back against this, including Congresswoman Renee Elmers from North Carolina, who said that this might actually hurt the Republican standing with young female voters, and that the rape exemptions in some of these bills are simply not they're too restrictive. Now, I recognize that in part, Renee Elmer's opposition is based on the political expediency of this, not actually caring that much about the implications for women, but at least she recognizes the rape issue. And when you see Republican women turning against the Republican Party, you know that they're really pushing the boundaries to the right.
This is so absurd. This is their first effort. We're going to see plenty of this. And if they ever get into taxes or jobs, don't think for a minute that it's going to benefit your average American.
Well, we'll see what their reactions are after President Obama's State of the Union speech and what he's going to propose around taxes. We'll see what the arguments are that they make against those changes. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpackman. We will take a break. Plenty more after this on Martin Luther King Day.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We are mostly funded by individual viewers through our membership program. Please consider becoming a David Pakman Show member at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Cameron Turner. Cameron, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. We depend on the support of members like Cameron and everybody else who has signed up for membership. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up today. Remember that any shopping you do on Amazon.com can support our program. Go to our website, davidpakman.com, and click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page, and then just do your Amazon shopping. I recommend bookmarking that link, and Amazon will send us a little cut from everything that you purchase at Amazon.com. Over the last week, our viewers have purchased a lot of interesting stuff, including a big bulk order, Lewis, of 5-Hour Energy, that energy drink. I have never had one of those, and I have no interest whatsoever in those drinks. If I need some kind of energy boost, I'll have a coffee, okay? And for me, taking these shots of super highly caffeinated stuff that is unregulated, I just don't like anything about it. I don't know if you ever drink this stuff.
I had one. I had one once, and I didn't really notice much of anything. But I agree. I'm with you. I mean, if I need a little boost, I'll have a coffee once in a while. Yeah,
and I'd be curious, the person who ordered the big bulk pack, what do you use it for? Is it like casual drinking, or do you work some kind of overnight job, or what's the story? I am curious, people who tell me that they take those very, on a regular basis, what the long-term health impact is, and it may be none. I just don't know. Also, a lot of Carhartt items being ordered, and this is so funny to me, Lewis. Carhartt is this brand of clothing that I don't really know how to describe it. I'll give you my experience with it. Up in Massachusetts, it was typically construction people, people that work outside, more kind of hill town or rural individuals who would wear Carhartt brand stuff. And since coming to New York City, in New York City, Carhartt is kind of becoming like a hipster type. It's cool to have like a Carhartt winter hat or jacket or pants. It's so crazy to me that the populations that wear Carhartt up in Massachusetts, where we were from, are the exact opposite of who wears Carhartt here in the city.
That is funny. I never would have predicted that. And I mean, I wonder what the people at Carhartt feel about that. It's, considering that it's a hipster trend now, those usually end and they'll switch to something else. But
my guess is Carhartt feels absolutely fine about having more people buying their stuff.
Probably. I would assume so.
Yeah, I wonder if the people who watch our show who are buying Carhartt stuff are in Camp A that I mentioned, or Camp B, or, maybe in a different camp altogether. Remember, use our Amazon link at davidpakman.com to support our show with the shopping you already plan to do. Fox News has now issued multiple apologies for the crazy coverage they had around the Charlie Hebdo massacre in Paris last week and the week before, where they said that they had so-called terror experts on saying that Birmingham is 100% Muslim, talking about no-go zones and all sorts of crazy stuff. Here is apology number 1. This is Julie Banderas. Let's listen.
A correction now. Over the course of this last week, we have made some regrettable errors on air regarding the Muslim population in Europe, particularly with regard to England and France. Now, this applies especially to discussions of so-called no-go zones, areas where non-Muslims allegedly aren't allowed in and police supposedly won't go. To be clear, there is no formal designation of these zones in either country and no credible information to support the assertion there are specific areas in these countries that exclude individuals based solely on their religion. There are certainly areas of high crime in Europe, as there are in the United States and other countries, where police and visitors enter with caution. We deeply regret the errors and apologize to any and all who may have taken offense, including the people of France and England.
And then here is apology number 2 that I have for you today. This is Janine Pirro.
This week on this program, a guest made a serious factual error that we wrongly let stand unchallenged and uncorrected. The guest asserted that the city of Birmingham, England, is totally Muslim and that it is a place where non-Muslims don't go. Both are incorrect. The most recent census data, which is from 2011, indicates 22% of the population of Birmingham identifies themselves as Muslim. Also, we could find no credible source that indicates Birmingham is a so-called no-go zone. We deeply regret these errors and apologize to the people of Birmingham, our viewers, and all who've been offended.
Basically, they're saying, hey, everybody, we've been reporting flat-out made-up stuff for the better part of 2 weeks. We apologize. We take it all back.
Is Fox ever going to sit down and say, this person we're about to have on is a pretty extreme person. They're a pretty big idiot, not very credible, and nobody really talks to them. Should we bring them on? Should we not bring them on? They don't seem to ask those questions.
Of course not. And if Fox News is now opening the door to these apologies, Lewis, I would love to hear more serious apologies for all of the other stuff. Like, for example, Ladies and gentlemen, for close to 8 years, we've been implicitly and explicitly suggesting and allowing guests to suggest that then Senator and now President Barack Obama may be a Muslim, Indonesian, Kenyan communist fraud who has no legal standing to even be president of the United States. That was incorrect, and we apologize for that. That's an apology that I would love to see on Fox News someday.
Yeah, that will never happen. Perhaps it's all weighed, and they know that they will have people on who might, for whom they might need to apologize for afterwards. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe their constituents don't really, most of their viewers, I should say, don't really get mad over the things like this that are said.
Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 15 years, Fox News has misinformed audiences to such an extent that polls show watching no news at all leaves you better informed than watching Fox News as your primary source of news. We are apologizing for that today. We have made a mistake, a 15-year mistake.
Only 15 years? Has it really been only 15?
No, maybe I don't remember how long they've been on. Maybe it's closer to 20 years. I don't remember exactly when Fox News went on the air. That's the apology I'm waiting for from Fox, and I have a feeling I'm going to be waiting for it for a very long time. Boko Haram, the destruction that Boko Haram has left in an incredible trail of satellite imagery has now been released. We talked to you about the Islamist group's massacre of what some estimates say could be 2,000, 3,000, even more people in Nigeria. We now have satellite imagery, Lewis, which shows the destruction of close to 4,000 structures in Baga and Durom Baga last week. This is just insane, and just as insane as the level of destruction that we're seeing from Boko Haram is the continued disproportionately small amount of media coverage that this has been receiving. We have been seeing media coverage of it, Lewis, and more so recently. But when you think about thousands of people massacred, and you think about the amount of coverage it has received compared to the tragic killings, of course, of around 20 people in France, other individual instances of terror which receive so much more coverage, it really just shows the extent to which the corporate media industrial complex has compromised our ability to really hear about what's going on.
And to take this to another level, this is usually the type of story that they would love to talk about, because here you have Muslim extremists slaughtering people. And, you know, especially on Fox News, you would think that this would be front and center, but it isn't.
A businessman from Baga told the BBC how he fled from the town along with about 5,000 others, saying that people were just being killed like animals. We have here a slaughter of just incredibly heinous depravity. And everybody needs to be aware of what's going on here. And we've talked about the Nigerian government's possible, I hesitate to use the term protection of Boko Haram, but maybe slight indifference as a result of possibly fear. We're not even alleging that it's an issue of corruption. It may just be completely an issue of fear here. And I don't know what it is going to take to change the situation, but it's a real humanitarian crisis, Lewis.
I hope that something happens before this happens again over there. That there needs to be an intervention of some sort, and we were too late already. This has been happening for too long as it is.
Join us on our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/Reddit, REDDIT. Lots of great stuff going on there. Next, we will talk about Schadenfreude.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Richard Smith, who is professor of psychology at the University of Kentucky and also author of the book The Joy of Pain, Schadenfreude and the Dark Side of Human Nature. Let's start with what is Schadenfreude, which comes from the German. What does that mean? What are we talking about?
Well, Schadenfreude means essentially joy at someone's suffering. And that's how it's translated actually from the German. Schad meaning pain, and then Freude meaning joy. Some people like to speculate that the German language and Germans themselves have an affinity to coming up with words like this. I don't know, I have no answer to that question, but they certainly have the word, and English does not. But that's essentially what it means.
And when we talk about Schadenfreude and we talk about joy at others' pain, are we talking about a sort of form of jealousy or envy, or is this something different altogether?
It's different. What causes confusion sometimes is that the two emotions are so intimately linked with each other. And you can go back to definitions that Aristotle gave of envy, and one of his statements was that essentially, because envy is so painful, that anything that takes envy away, even if it's someone's suffering, then it's natural that should also be pleasing because that pain has been taken away. So some of the more interesting cases of Schadenfreude end up being linked with envy. And so that tends to link the two together, even though they're actually quite opposite in terms of experiences, because envy is painful and Schadenfreude is pleasurable. So they're kind of opposites as far as emotions go, but they are connected because one leads to the other.
People in Western societies, though, do seem to have a sense of kind of whether it's okay or not to take pleasure at the pain of others, right? Because there are certain situations, like, for example, American Idol, where if people have seen the early episodes, the singers go up to audition, and some are really bad, and people generally feel okay kind of laughing at how badly someone did. Some people do actually say to me, I actually feel really bad for those people. That level of taking pleasure in someone else's failure, so to speak, seems to be far more acceptable than in other areas, right? Where when it comes to your financial standing feels better because one of your friends just declared bankruptcy, for example. There's very different moral connotations to these.
Yeah, exactly. And the key difference, most people would argue who've studied Schadenfreude will say that it's the justice feature in the case of American Idol that allows one to feel that sort of more open pleasure, because at least there's the perception, the sort of general consensus that people who go on that show, they're kind of, well, if you think you're good enough for that show, then whatever happens, if you make a fool of yourself, well, you kind of had it coming. So it's deserved in that sense. And then some of the contestants also act in a very arrogant way, as if they're great, and they're not so great sometimes. And so that kind of gives the Schadenfreude more of a sort of open season in a way. And I think, the show kind of plays upon that by their selective choices of who they're going to show in those early rounds, I think.
Do you think that this idea could be applied to some polling around the minimum wage, specifically that when you poll individuals as to whether they think there should be an increase to the minimum wage, typically the group that is very strongly opposed to that increase are those individuals who make not that much more than the minimum wage. And the idea around this is that if those individuals see the people earning a minimum wage have their wages elevated, now they become equivalent to those earning a minimum wage. So is there some element of taking joy in the fact that there is a group earning even less than they are?
I think so. I mean, the research on this issue is actually quite getting more and more involved. And one of the more interesting aspects is the intergroup level and the general comparative perspective that leads to pleasure at another person's suffering, if they're perceived as therefore a downward comparison, is very, very clear. A lot of evidence for that. But when you have the group level operating, it seems to enhance it in some way. So if you categorize yourself as different from somebody else and they suffer or they're seen as inferior, then you get a lot of self-esteem mileage out of that and pleasure based on the various perceptions of what may be happening to the outgroup, especially if it can be perceived as inferior. So
there's kind of a analogy here, I think, to some of our recent discussions about this idea of otherism, which we sometimes see in victim blaming. And as you and I are speaking, I'm kind of reminded of a conversation we had about sometimes you will hear different degrees of victim blaming when people are victims of a crime, whether it's, rape is a common one, but other types of crime as well. And I think that there's an important element there of trying to figure out how the victim of the crime either in some way deserved it or is different than you. And I think a big part of that is wanting to feel like you would act differently. The same wouldn't happen to you. You wouldn't be subject to the same repercussions as someone else. And it's not so much, I don't think it's Schadenfreude in the sense that you're not deriving pleasure from someone else's pain, but you're certainly rationalizing a way to feel more secure personally as a result of something negative that happened to someone else. What do you think? Maybe I'm off on this.
Yeah, I agree. There's probably a number of different elements depending on the particular circumstance, but I agree with what you say, but it could nonetheless be a certain amount of satisfaction out of being able to differentiate yourself as superior to that other as well, even though that may be, in a particular case, a minor feature of what's going on. I do think we get some pleasure from feeling just better than others, whether it's individual to individual or group versus group. And when you can throw justice into it, so you can latch onto things that show that the victim deserves their suffering, then it just gives you an easier license to sort of feel that pleasure because they deserve it. And it also gives you possibly a little bit of a sense of superiority. I forget who actually said this. I think it was Oscar Wilde. Said on occasions of this kind, it's becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind. It becomes a pleasure. So differentiations like that. I think there's potential for pleasure for that reason alone. Not discounting these other dynamics too.
The last thing I'd love to talk about in just a little bit of time we have left is you've talked about the role of envy and Schadenfreude in the Nazi persecution of Jews. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a very complicated aspect of human activity to explain, but it's very clear if you look, I think, at the history of how the Nazis responded to the Jews, that there was an element of a sense of Jewish superiority. It was complicated because it's combined with a sense of Nazi Aryan superiority as well. But I think that a lot of that was really camouflage. That is, that there was a real sense of actual Jewish superiority and a basis for envy, though it was not typically acknowledged. But if you could make the case, and I think one can, then it means that a part of the satisfaction over the persecution would come from dealing with that somewhat unacknowledged envy.
And maybe some of the rationalization that Nazis may have done may have been from, hey, these Jews kind of deserve this because they're privileged in other ways, and we're just taking them back down a peg, so to speak. Exactly,
and Hitler and many of the Nazi leaders pounced on apparent evidence to legitimately, so-called, blame the Jews based on their apparent collective behavior and also perceptions of stereotypical traits and you name it. And so the average Nazi would never say, I'm envious of the Jews, but if you kind of dig below the surface, you can make the case that there was actually a lot of envy operating. And envy is a tough thing to study because people don't acknowledge it, even though it can be a very strong emotion, which is one of the reasons why it's so interesting to associate with Schadenfreude, which is also a negative emotion. So the two together are a tough pairing, even though they probably go together quite a bit. This issue of how one can relate envy and Schadenfreude to the Nazi behavior is a very interesting topic that really hasn't been looked at that much, but I think it does explain a lot of the dynamics going on between the Nazis and the Jews. I really do.
Very, very interesting. We've been speaking with Professor Richard Smith. The book is The Joy of Pain, Schadenfreude, and the Dark Side of Human Nature. Thank you so much for being on with us.
My pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Earlier this week, Democratic Representative Andre Carson of Indiana was named to House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which has thrown the right wing into an absolute tizzy, including Brian Fisher, host of Focal Point Radio for the American Family Association. He just could not believe, he and Sandy Rios could not believe, how could we have a Muslim on the Intelligence Committee? Here's Brian Fisher.
You know, Nancy Pelosi just appointed yesterday Andre Carson. I'm sure you know this. He was the second Muslim to be elected to the House of Representatives. The problem with Andre Carson is that he's received tens of thousands of dollars in support from CARE, which is an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation case. Also from another organization, he's received thousands of dollars. He's made public statements. And now Nancy Pelosi's putting him on the House Intelligence Committee.
Yeah, that's what blows my mind, Sandy. On the House Intelligence Committee, we just had this Muslim terrorist attack in Paris. Everybody's saying we've got to ramp up our effort to stop the threat of Islam in our country. And now it's like putting a fox inside the hen house, to use a worn-out proverb.
I hate to break it to Brian Fisher, but before being concerned about a Muslim on the Intelligence Committee, I'd be concerned about the fact that James Inhofe, a guy who doesn't believe in science, is on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. James Inhofe, a public official who said he doesn't believe that God would create a planet that humans could damage the environment on. He is on the Environment Committee. That is way more of a concern than someone who identifies as Muslim being on a committee related to intelligence. Somehow I don't think Brian Fisher's so concerned about Inhofe.
Probably not, as long as he's a good Christian. There's this idea among people like Brian Fisher and the conservative right-wing Christians that if you are Muslim, you are just inherently evil. And it's really embarrassing.
And if what Brian Fisher is saying is that any elected official whose decision-making ability as a legislator will be clouded by their religiosity or adherence to their religion's beliefs, and they shouldn't be on any committee or even an elected official, I would agree. The problem is that Brian Fisher probably wouldn't apply that to all of the Christian lawmakers who are using their religion to dictate public policy on abortion and same-sex marriage and science being taught in classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. There's quite a double standard there, isn't there?
There is. Jesus is the way and there is no other way. And everyone else is just evil and trying to destroy the country. So I think, this is just normal stuff from Brian Fisher. He's an idiot.
As many of our viewers know, I'm from Argentina, moved to the U.S. when I was a kid, and I have one of the most insane stories that I have heard of possible corruption to tell you about from Argentina. You're not going to believe this. Over the weekend, I was in Massachusetts, and my dad was saying to me, hey, I don't know if you've heard, but there's this Argentinian prosecutor. His name's Alberto Nisman. He has accused the president of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, of obstructing an investigation into the 1994 bombing of a Jewish center. Now, for people who don't know, in 1994, a Jewish center in Argentina was bombed. It left 85 people dead and 300 injured. Much of the intelligence has pointed very directly to Iran for this. And Alberto Nisman has, of course, pointed out over time that there are Iranian terror cells operating in South America, including in Argentina. And most recently has actually declared and was set to testify today that Argentina, that the administration involving Cristina Kirchner and also the foreign minister, Hector Timmerman, were going to be cutting a deal potentially that would prevent real prosecution of Iran. And the prosecutor accused Iran of being behind the attack, which is more or less common knowledge, but also said that the president, Cristina Kirchner, was hampering the investigation to try to curry favor with Iran. The government has denied this. So I said, oh, I'm going to look this up. This seems like an interesting story. So this morning I get to my desk and I look up the story. I type in Alberto Nisman, and it turns out that late last night, early this morning, hours before he was set to formally testify to these accusations about the government, claiming that he has recordings, which he was going to be presenting at this testimony, of the Argentinian administration coordinating with Iran. He's dead. He's found dead in his apartment of what is being described as a suicide. Of course, instantly, this becomes a claim that many in the Argentinian media are skeptical of. But at the same time, this doesn't prove anything, because you could say, hey, you know what happened, David? If you believe that the guy was lying, accusing the administration fraudulently, he started these accusations, David, never thinking that he would ever actually get to testify. And now that he had to testify, he knew he was lying, so he decided to take his own life. That would be kind of a very neat summation of it, very neat and tidy, Lewis. What others are hypothesizing are, of course, that this could have been the Argentinian government who had him killed and set it up as a suicide. But there's another theory, because yesterday, in the last couple of days, there's an individual who Alberto Nisman accused of being an operative in Argentina in 1994, just before the terror attack. That individual was eventually captured and killed. His son was captured and killed over the weekend. And you could hypothesize that if there are indeed Iranian terror cells in Argentina, and they found out that this son of the former accused was killed, that the Iranian terror cells could have organized the killing to look like a suicide of Alberto Nisman. Will we ever know? I don't know, Lewis, but this is just an incredibly shocking coincidence. This is like out of a movie.
It really is. And it's perfectly possible that the terror cells were the ones who conducted the original attack and who killed this man who was about to testify. And it's still possible that the Argentine government was obstructing the investigations. You know, they may not have been involved with the bombing, but still, if they were obstructing the investigations for one reason or another, they should be held accountable. Yeah,
and I still have contacts in Argentina who are defenders of this administration, and it doesn't matter what you say to them. When I visit, I try to not even talk about it, because you cannot convince them that this administration is at all corrupt. And if you can, they'll usually say, well, yeah, but it's Argentina. You know, we've always had corruption, kind of whitewashing it all as kind of being equal, and just totally dismissing all of the facts of this. It makes for some pretty complex social situations, as you can imagine, Lewis, when I visit.
It sounds terrible. You really have to prepare for that. And, you know, mentally prepare for whatever may hit you.
We have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen to a voicemail.
This country was established on Christianity, and you guys are just throwing it out the window. It won't last much longer. Oh yeah, one more thing. This is Steve in Cheyenne, Wyoming. You guys are ashamed of mentioning the name Jesus, but you don't have a problem with all them other religious names. Why are you so afraid of him? Maybe because he's right. Anyway, more power to you. Have a good ride. See you in hell.
Well, why would we be seeing this guy in hell, Lewis, unless he also is doing bad stuff like we are? Or maybe he's one of the Christians that subscribes to, we are all sinners and we are all going to hell. In which case, it kind of makes heaven unnecessary. But I thought heaven was a big part of their hypothesis, so I don't really get it. But I guess we're certainly going to hell, that's for sure.
Confusion is a big part of their lives. So I think this guy's confused. He's right about one thing. It won't last much longer because his religion is fading into obscurity.
All right, on today's bonus show, clashes in Pakistan over the Charlie Hebdo cartoon. Miami Beach cops will no longer get tasered because it's extremely unpleasant. And a best-selling book about heaven being real is pulled because it turns out the entire thing was lies. That may not shock much of our audience. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Get access to the bonus show by becoming a David Pakman Show member at davidpakman.com/membership. Speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.